Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
6:07 now. It's Wednesday morning. It's the 10th day of April. Thanks for jumping in here with us as we chug along here to get you started the right way this morning. Coming up at 6:35, we'll have our weekly touch base with Cal Thomas. Weekly touch base, base touch. We're going to touch base with Cal Thomas like we do every week. Just use English, Larry. It's a good language, actually, once you get the hang of it. 7:05, Katie Gorka is the brand new chairwoman of the Republican Party in Fairfax County. 7:35, Maryland State Senator Justin Reedy. 8:05, KT McFarland, and 8:35, Steve Malloy, former Trump EPA guy, because jeans are now bad for the environment. Sorry, Levi's. Yeah. Hate to see you go. I'm Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock.
Good
Julie,
morning.
if I were to tell you that National Public Radio, NPR, is liberal, and the people who work there are liberal, and there's hardly any, if any, at all, Republicans or conservatives who are there at all or have any kind of voice of influence, would you be surprised?
I would say the 1990s called and they want their news back, or 80s, 1980. I mean, when has it not? I mean, this is nothing new. I know that there's a story on this. It's a great story.
Yeah, but it is. It's sort of a confirmation of everything we've all known.
Yeah, we've been beating our head against the wall saying defund NPR because it's basically MSNBC.
Yeah.
For decades.
Barry Weiss is an apostate liberal who worked at New York Times until she saw, for one reason or another, that suddenly they had become woke again.
Well, it's funny. Barry Weiss, and these guys are great, right? We're all thrilled that they've sort of come around, seen the light, but there is this sort of natural, sort of. I don't know.
Well, we want to embrace them and make them heroes, or as many people do, because, oh my gosh, this is great that we've got a liberal who's now blowing the whistle on conservatives. It's like, we've been saying it for decades.
Yeah, there's a little bit of irritation with Barry Weiss because it's like, well, thank you for noticing what we've been noticing for decades, but whatever.
And we've been called names for pointing it out. But it is important. And by the way, she started this news agency called the Free Press.
It's great.
And it's got a lot of apostate liberals who are now trying to do real journalism. Yeah.
Michael Schallenberger
And so she has this interview with this person who is currently a business editor, I believe, at NPR, who is basically being a whistleblower. A couple of things that they said there. I found 87 registered Democrats working in editorial positions and 0 Republicans. None.
It's important to also say this dude still works at NPR.
Yeah.
He's worked there for 25 years. He's not a disgruntled ex-employee. He still works there.
No, but he thinks there's a problem. He's at least recognizing that it's a problem.
But I'm just saying it's not one of these cases of I used to work there.
He got fired for sexual harassment or something.
Like he's showing up to work this morning.
He also said about the Hunter Biden laptop story, the laptop was newsworthy, but the timeless journalistic instinct of following a hot story lead was being squelched. During a meeting with colleagues, I listened as one of NPR's best and most fair-minded journalists said it was good we weren't following the laptop story because it could help Trump. Be clear here that he still describes this person as one of their best and most fair-minded journalists. So... I also love the fact that NPR tried to attract more Black and Hispanic listeners by running endless segments centering Black and Hispanic voices. And it turns out it was really, really popular with white liberals who listened. It didn't do anything increasing their Black or Hispanic, but it really made the white liberals feel good about themselves to have these stories centered on Black and Hispanic voices.
Yeah, but he did say that on the laptop issue that once it came out, or I'm sorry, the Russia collusion issue, he said once, Mueller came out with the ruling that there was no Russia collusion, it just disappeared. They had endlessly covered this nonstop, and then once the Mueller ruling came out, where again no collusion, it just disappeared. They didn't talk about it. They didn't even talk about the ruling,
and there was no circumspection about hey, how did we get this wrong? All right, so I want you. Barry Weiss also performed an interview with this person. She's got a podcast called Honestly, and I want you to listen to this because. Well, you listen to it, and then we'll give you a breakdown of the analysis because I've got strong feelings about what you're about to hear. And again, this person's name is Uri Berliner. And in this part in particular, he describes how Trump derangement syndrome basically forever altered the NPR newsroom. By the way, as I'm about to play this, just bear in mind, because one thing we sort of left out in this entire conversation, you're paying for this.
Yes.
This is you're subsidizing their work here.
Yes. National Public Radio. It's like PBS as
Yes.
well.
It's
they get
all
taxpayer-
coming out of your pocket,
That's right.
your tax
That's right.
dollars.
Everyone knew that NPR had a liberal bent. It was like saying these days, like Fox has a conservative bent. That was obvious to anyone. But you argue that it's really gone from having a liberal bent or a liberal shading to really a bias. Here's one thing you write in your essay. You write, for the majority of your time at NPR, despite the liberal bend, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk, activist, or scolding. Ori, when did that start to change? When did the thing that everyone sort of recognized as sort of a liberal bias start to shift into something harder than that, into what you call a knee-jerk, activist, and even scolding quality?
Well, I think it was cumulative. I don't think it was one event. I mean, I think part of it was Trump's election. I think like every newsroom, every legacy media newsroom, we were shocked, disturbed, distraught, really troubled. We assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she didn't, and it was really an unsettling experience. But I also think, to me, it revealed that we didn't really understand a lot of what was going on in America, that we were out of touch. But I think also we kind of locked down after a while. I think after a while we started covering Trump in a way that like a lot of legacy news organizations, that we were trying to damage his presidency, to even find anything we could to harm him. And I think what we latched on to was Russia collusion, like a lot of news organizations, which was, as I write, sort of catnip, although it was just rumors and a lot of it based on pretty shoddy documents or evidence. It wasn't really solid, but I think it was compelling. And for us, I think a lot of newspapers, use documents or anonymous sources. We really latched on to Adam Schiff. He was like our muse to the Trump collusion story. We had him on constantly, a lot. I think I counted 25 times. And in most of those conversations, he sort of alluded to evidence he may have had, or sort of teased out, Russia, he was colluding, or the campaign was colluding with Russia. And then the Mueller report came out, and no collusion. And, I think we sort of went to the story kind of disappeared. But
all right. So a lot of that is good. A lot of that is true. A lot of that is obvious. And we were calling it out at the time, by the way. But I'm going to disagree with him a bit on one major fundamental point, and that was it really got bad during Trump. When Trump won, that's when things turned. He's wrong. And I'll give you my opinion in a moment, a little bit more on this story, that apparently NPR really, really liberal and not really good at journalism. And we'll explore that further in just a moment. First, though, at 6:50.
Mark Levin, weeknights from 6 till 9.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Uri Berliner, senior business editor at NPR, kind of blowing the whistle here with an essay of Free Press and this podcast with Barry Weiss explaining how bad it's gotten there at NPR. Again, federally funded journalism. And he was asked, you guys have always been sort of liberal and nerdy and that kind of thing, but when did this major shift happen? And here was his answer.
I mean, I think part of it was Trump's election. I think like every newsroom, every legacy media newsroom, we were shocked, disturbed, distraught, really troubled. We assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she didn't.
Okay, so that is evidence right there that something was already wrong.
Yeah.
And something was already broken, because he's describing his newsroom as being shocked and distraught and disturbed because they assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win. Mm-hmm. A newsroom is not supposed to assume anything. If you assumed Hillary Clinton was going to win and the prospect of Donald Trump winning makes you shocked and upset and distraught, you've already got a systemic problem.
Yes, and also he said it like everyone. It was as a block, NPR as a thing. It wasn't certain people in leadership.
That's right.
It wasn't certain people that were more liberal. It was the entire thing.
And he went on to say, that we had clearly missed something. In other words, there was not one person in that newsroom, by the way, based, 5 miles from where we're sitting right now in D.C., not one person in that newsroom said, there's something going on in this country right now. Now, 5 miles over, northwest of where NPR is, we sat here doing the exact same thing that NPR does every day with basically the same equipment, but a much smaller staff.
That's right.
And we saw it. We were now. Listen, no one here predicted Trump was going to win, but I remember the day of the election, I said, "Here's how Trump can win." And I think that there's a chance for him to win.
I will say we are known as conservative radio, right? Like
they're not known as liberal
radio. They're supposed to be non-biased,
That's
totally taxpayer funded, representing all of America.
And not one employee was there. Okay, but when did that start? I'll tell you this, and I'll be honest with you. I have a lot of, there's a lot of conservatives in this town and Republicans who love listening to NPR.
Oh, I know.
So smart.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And guess what?
But I do love the polling when they're like, when in his article, he's talked about in 1990, it was this many conservatives who listen to NPR.
Right.
And by 2018, it was like a tiny amount. And I'm like, those were all the never Trumpers.
That's right. That's all that was left. But I will agree with him. There was a time, I would listen sometimes.
Me too. Yeah.
I would know and recognize they were liberal, but there was also content that wasn't directly offensive to me that I thought was, oh, come on, you're just lying. You're gaslighting me now. I will tell you when it started, and it wasn't Trump, because as he just relayed there, it was already there by the time Trump lost.
Yeah.
It started with Obama's win. See, it's always easy to find bias when someone loses and everyone's upset about it, and suddenly you see that you're slanting the news to hurt someone.
Yeah.
What's harder and more insidious to find is when your hero wins and you start slanting your journalism to help him.
Yeah.
When you start ignoring all of the legitimate criticisms. Look at how NPR covered the debate over the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
Not one person in that room said, wait a minute, he keeps saying that we can choose our doctor, but clearly we're not going to be able to choose our doctor. They missed all of that. It started with Obama because they refused to criticize him.
And people have completely memory hold. Now, I know that Romney is one of these people nowadays that a lot of, sort of conservatives and Trump supporters are sort of like, Romney, right?
Because he's changed to try to appeal to NPR.
I get it. We make fun of Romney all the time, but people forget how brutally he was treated during that race against Obama. It was shocking. This is when I realized that the left has gone nuts, is because I would be in my front yard. I've told this story before. I'd be in my front yard. I had a tiny Romney yard sign. The names I was called, they would slow down to scream horrible, vulgar comments while my kids were with me.
Yep.
And I realized, we're talking about Romney, people.
Yeah.
So, yes,
if you go back
right.
and chart that listenership, and when conservatives started dying out or Republicans stopped listening, it was the Obama era.
Absolutely.
Obama is when they threw all of their journalistic integrity out the window, whatever
100%.
Little they had left, because there was no longer a critical eye, because their job was to protect. They were the Praetorian Guard, and they had to protect the Obama administration at all costs. And then by the time Trump came along, it was already there, and it was ingrained.
Also, that they love to say, well, it was Trump, right? Because it almost gives them cover, because Trump's crazy.
Right.
Trump's,
and it was a war on journalists. It was
and now how they love Romney. It's like, you didn't love Romney.
That's right. It's a great point. And until they actually reach that realization. I mean, I was excited about this story. I'm watching it. And then the second he said, Trump changed everything. It's like, nope, dude, you still don't get it.
And actually in that audio, I just want to say one thing really quickly.
Yep.
Barry Weiss is like, Fox is super conservative. It's like, Fox gives fair time.
Right.
Every time. Juan Williams and Jessica Tarloff.
Fox has 5 primetime shows that are conservative.
But also they have guests on and they give them fair time.
That's right. Juan Williams, you'll remember, was not liberal enough for them.
About that.
Juan Williams had to be fired because
NPR smeared him.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, it's 6:22.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
6:37 now. It's O'Connor and Company. Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock. And coming up later in the program, we're going to talk to a bunch of people who make the news. Specifically, 7:05, Katie Gorka, the new Republican chairwoman of Fairfax County. 7:35, Maryland State Senator Justin Reedy on the and of the General Assembly session there in Annapolis. 805 KT McFarland and then 835 Steve Malloy, formerly of the Trump EPA transition team. Apparently jeans are now bad for the environment. So everybody, if you want to help the planet, take your pants off right now. I used to use that as a pickup line back in the 90s.
Would you stop?
You'd be shocked how successful I
worked?
was. Yeah.
Oh.
Listen, you want to embrace the environment, right?
Don't no. If you're single out there, don't listen to Larry.
Save the
okay?
planet.
The
Go
90s
pantsless.
the 90s were very different.
They sure were. Oh, if only we knew then.
Better.
Can we go back, please? We had no idea. Joining us right now, Cal Thomas, friend and mentor and bon vivant. Cal, apparently now, I didn't realize this, but now we've got a whistleblower from inside National Public Radio. Did you know that NPR was liberal?
No, I am shocked, Larry. And by the way, you just put an image in my mind about pants that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. For the rest
You're
of the
welcome.
Day.
Oh, please. I've heard about you in the 90s. Come on.
The 90s?
The
I'm not there yet.
1890s. Yeah.
Oh, the 1890s.
Oh,
Sorry
Cal.
about that image, Cal.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. Well, thank goodness it's radio.
Right, exactly.
So let's move on. For the NPR thing is actually indicative of a lot of stuff that we're seeing right now. When you point this out on this Axios column, Jim Vandehey and Mike Allen writing that America is not actually as divided as we think. It's not as divided as the media tells us on a regular basis.
Well, that's true, and it's very interesting. We're a nation of 330 million, depending on how many illegals have crossed the border in the last 24 hours. And there is an outrage industry out there, and it does work. It works for cable TV, it works for fundraising, it works for ratings, all kinds of things.
Public radio.
But I think the column you're pointing to in Axios, just a few ticks here, he said, no, most Christians aren't white Christian nationalists who see Donald Trump as a godlike figure. Most are ignoring politics and wrestling with their faith. No, most college professors aren't trying to silence conservatives or turn kids into liberal activists. Most are teaching math or physics or biology. I'm going to a college next week in Michigan. I'll give you a report on that one to see if it's true.
Yes.
And no immigrants who are here illegally aren't rushing to vote and commit crimes. Actual data show both rarely happen, even amid a genuine crisis at the border. So, you got to look for the outrage stuff to keep the eyeballs glued to the screen and to keep the checks being written for various organizations on the left and the right. So settle down, America. It's bad, but it's not that bad. It could be worse, and if it keeps going this way, by the way, it probably will.
Cal, I want to go back to the NPR thing just for a minute because I feel like, I've been in Washington for a long time. And
I'm sorry.
I know. And I could have been such a nicer person, but I've been in Washington for a long time, and I know that there have been calls on the right for the defending of NPR for years, decades, right? And Reagan complained about NPR, and I feel like these whistleblower stories come out, they make a big splash, but then they kind of get memory hold. Will this NPR story make a difference? Will there be renewed calls to defund NPR? Not that it'll actually happen, and will there be changes in newsrooms? Will they sort of actually finally look at themselves and say, we are not representing or reporting on the American public the way they deserve?
Well, everybody has their little niche now, and this is too bad. When I started as a copy boy at NBC back in the 1960s, there were real journalists. These were people who came from wire services and newspapers. They weren't coming from activist groups. They weren't coming from the White House to ABC News like George Stephanopoulos or Jake Tapper on CNN or many others who used to work for Democrat politicians. They were actual journalists. They covered, as young people, school board meetings, local elections. They earned their stripes. But now the public is confused. They don't really know who to believe and who is a real journalist. I would just ignore NPR. I was the only conservative commentary on there, I think 30 years ago or so. And a new regime came in and they said, we've got to let you go. And I said, why is that? And she said, you become too predictable. I said, I'm predictable on NPR, the only conservative? Are you kidding me?
I love that. So when was that, Cal?
Oh, golly, that'd be in the early 90s, I think, a long time ago, back when I was still fighting acne.
Yeah. See, that's when it's funny. He was asked. We just you've gotten us right off of this conversation about the NPR, so it's in our minds. But he was asked by Barry Weiss, when did it really start to get bad? And he said, well, when Trump won the election, because we all assumed Hillary would win. And I said, wait, hold on there. If the entire newsroom assumed Hillary would win, and you were distraught at the idea of Trump winning, you already had a systemic problem there. And I think it started with it really got bad at Obama, not because with Trump they opposed the president, and so it's easy to see the opposing a president at every turn. It's harder and more insidious when you see a newsroom completely give a president a pass and not report on the guy that they love with any kind of scrutiny. And that's certainly what we saw during the Obama years.
Right. Well, it's groupthink, as Orwell pointed out. Everybody thinks the same, and they don't know anybody else. They don't go to these social events where any conservatives are.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a quick story. There was a columnist for the New York Times a couple of years ago, called me up, asked me about something. I've known him for a while, and at the end of the conversation, he said, "Are you still writing your column?" I felt like saying, "Yes." Are you? He doesn't read me, but I read him. They only read stuff that reinforces. And before we leave, I gotta mention this quick thing about the Trump trial coming up on Monday. The questions that are being asked of prospective jurors in New York: are you a member of QAnon? Do you listen to far right radio? Are you a conservative? All these things. Wow. The question they ought to be asking is, who'd you vote for in the last election?
Right. Which is really what they're trying to get at. That's a great point.
That's right.
And it tells you everything you need to know about the judicial aspect of this or the jurisprudence. Yep. Cal, we got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Right,
you
guys.
are never predictable. But that's why you're constantly here with us, because we love
Larry,
your unpredictable insights.
I would just say, Larry, that you have the cool, clear eyes of a seeker of wisdom and truth. And there's that upturned chin and that grin of impetuous youth. Oh, I believe in you.
Sounds like you believe in me. Yeah.
Aww.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I love it when you drop a little Frank Lesser on me. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Cal.
Good memory. Thanks.
How to succeed in business without really trying.
Ew.
Yeah, thank you very much. 644. Keeping with our theme this morning about how politics is sort of beholden to the culture, and as culture shifts and cultural conversations change, so then does the political equation. We related this earlier to the abortion question and what's going on in Arizona and such, but let's look at a different aspect of this, and that has to do with a conversation that just happened on a podcast between Stephen A. Smith, a former basketball player and ESPN commentator, and Charles Barkley, also a former professional basketball player, Hall of Famer, and now a pro basketball commentator. Now, why should we care about what these two guys had to say? Well, I mean, we don't directly care about what these guys have to say, but because of who they are, where they come from, and the fact that they communicate to people who really don't focus much on news and politics.
Right.
They know what's going on in the world, but they don't consume what we do here. They're consuming sports talk. Mm-hmm. They're consuming stuff about their favorite basketball team or their favorite sport. And so suddenly, when the conversation turns to the news of the day, what these guys say makes an impact. And
especially to people who aren't sort of, saturated
aren't
in
plugged
it.
in, like as Rush would used to call them, which I was never a fan
normies.
of. Low information
low
voters
information. I was gonna
is
say
what
the
he would
normies.
call, which suggests they're dumb, but they're not dumb. They
Right.
just choose to be informed about other things than news and politics.
Some days I feel like they're the healthy ones.
Here's Stephen A. Smith and Charles Barkley, and listen to how this conversation went.
And you see the streets. You see the streets in New York.
3 weeks ago on TV, they had these migrants. First of all, the border is a joke. The border is a joke.
Yeah.
But they had these migrants, they call them, had just bust up in New York. They got them on camera kicking and beating like cops. They beat up these
Two cops. Beating up two cops. Beating up two police officers
But they were
in the subway station.
They were out of jail in 24 hours, and the next day.
Actually, it was the same day, Charles.
But 2 days later, they called them robbing Macy's. I like,
wow.
First of all, they beat up cops. How are you out of jail in 24 hours? And then clearly, 2 days later, they're robbing Macy's. Anybody, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, a dog, a cat, or a puppy, you know that's wrong, period.
But it's woke culture. But with woke culture and everything else that's been going on, you've got folks on the left that have endorsed a more lenient legal system, and obviously folks on the right going crazy about it and calling for law and order. Who do you side with, considering our iniquitous history, what's going on today, and who the candidates are in terms of Biden and Trump, in all likelihood, running for office? What do you do, Charles? Who do you vote for?
Now, I'm going to let him finish in a quick second. We don't have a whole lot of time here, but this is a big moment, right? Charles Barkley, who do you vote for given all of that? And the answer is obvious, right? And Charles Barkley, because of his employer probably at TNT and CNN, Time Warner, whatever, he can't answer that, and he won't answer that, but he sort of does.
First of all, we need law and order, Stephen A. If we're gonna,
I agree.
If we're gonna,
I'm with you,
dude. We need law and order. Hey, trying to fix inequalities has nothing to do with letting people go in stores and rob people.
Yes.
Thank you. So here you got two guys blasting woke culture, blasting the crime, blasting the border.
Blasting the
joke.
giveaways to
That's
illegals when citizens continue to suffer.
That's right. Black and Latino citizens who have been here for, centuries. Yeah.
Veterans, yeah.
That's huge.
It is huge. But also that you're right, Larry, about that last line. This whole idea of equity, this whole idea of reparations, this whole idea of, AOC saying they just needed bread to save their family. That's why they're loading lipstick from CVS into black garbage bags. Yeah, that's interesting commentary.
It makes a difference.
It
It's part of the reason why Democrats are panicking as much as they are. The blackmail vote is very much in play right now. It's 6:52.
Making sense of your world.
Thank you for your clear insight.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
This is a major wake-up call.
Making sense of the news.